3 nobles had gone north of Orem to hunt a magical beast that had already devoured 4 knights. When a storm of magically driven stones burst from the forest, Turan threw himself aside. Isella and Marvin did something else. Each of them grabbed a weaker knight and used the man as a shield. In that instant, Turan heard his dead mother's warning again. Nobles were shepherds, and knights were the dogs they could praise, sell, or sacrifice whenever it suited them. Yet Turan himself possessed power equal to a noble. To understand how a shepherd from the edge of the world came to stand among them, we have to return 8 years to the winter his magic first awakened. Turan was 10 when magic first answered his thoughts. He imagined a fire, and the stove ignited. He wished the firewood would rise, and it floated above the floor as naturally as if the world had always obeyed him.
"Mom, look at this! The firewood is flying!"
His mother did not smile. She reached for the floating wood with a face filled with resignation, warmed a cup of sheep's milk, and told him about the world below the hill.
"Promise that you will never use that power carelessly, especially in front of other people."
She said nobles descended from the Priya god tribe and ruled humanity through inherited magic. Knights carried weaker traces of that blood. They could be cherished like family, but they could also be sold, ordered into war, or sacrificed like shepherd dogs sent against wolves.
"If they discover you, bad nobles will take you away, and you will never see me again."
Turan promised. 8 years later, even after illness took his mother, he still lived alone on Hisaril Hill, herding sheep and hiding the power that had only grown stronger. He intended to remain there forever, until a dust-covered stranger knocked on his door. That morning, several villagers had accused Turan of killing an old man who had clearly been mauled by a leopard magical beast. Turan beat them, drove them away, and opened the next knock with a threat already on his tongue. The person outside was not a villager, but a traveler in a dust-covered cloak. Turan had never met a stranger in 18 years, and the chance to speak with someone who was not openly hostile proved stronger than his caution. He invited the man inside and served the best food he owned. The guest ate with precise manners, praised Turan's upbringing, and offered sincere condolences when he learned that Turan's mother had died.
"I am a knight. I served House Arabian for 60 years.
Turan tensed at the word knight, then slowly relaxed. Keorn looked like an ordinary healthy man in his 40s, yet he was 75. Wizards age slowly, and unless they used obvious magic, nothing in their appearance exposed what they were. That fact loosened one of the chains around Turan's heart. Keorn had ended his vassal contract a month earlier and chosen to spend his remaining years traveling rather than die in the service of one house.
Call me Keorn the Wanderer."
Before leaving to search for the magical beast, Keorn paid for the meal with a pure silver coin and promised he might return. For the first time in years, Turan found himself hoping that a visitor would keep his word. At sunset, Keorn came back carrying a wolf from the distant Sky Mountain range. That night, beneath stars brighter than any city could offer, Turan asked why Keorn risked himself for villagers who had cheated and insulted him. Keorn answered that people living beyond a wizard's protection spent every day at the mercy of magical beasts.
"They are pitiful people."
Keorn called it the pride of those who inherited divine power. The idea did not erase Turan's fear of nobles, but it proved that a knight could choose meaning instead of blind obedience. The next morning, Turan used human detection to find Keorn. His senses crossed kilometers of empty land and found the old knight bleeding before the half-rotted leopard Turan had killed days earlier. A stone from Turan's slingshot crossed the distance faster than sound and shattered the beast's head. The victory lasted only a moment. Pale green spirit light rose from the stump, and the headless corpse charged again.
"Undead spirits cannot be killed with physical attacks. Then how do I kill it?"
Keorn shouted for fire or lightning. Turan could not ignite the spirit directly, so he formed a flame above his hand, spun it with the motion of a sling, and launched it as a completed attack. The fire clung to the spiritual body until both magic and corpse burned away. At Keorn's instruction, Turan absorbed the beast's remaining magic power. The cold, addictive strength entering his body was unlike anything he had felt before, and Keorn finally understood that Turan's terrifying power had been innate. The wounded knight no longer addressed him as a shepherd. He called Turan young master and asked which house had produced him. Back at the cabin, Turan cleaned Keorn's wounds, while the old knight repeatedly apologized for being treated by someone he now assumed was noble-born. Turan hated the sudden distance and forced Keorn to speak to him as before.
That level of ability qualifies you as a noble, and not a low-ranking one.
Keorn did not dismiss Turan's mother's fear. 20 years earlier, House Arabian had fought House Zahar. More than 900 Arabian knights died, and every person Keorn loved was among them.
My two closest friends, my wife and my son, all died. Only I survived.
Still, Keorn said Turan's mother had been wrong about one thing. Turan was too strong to be treated like an ordinary knight. A great house might respect him as a fellow noble, and the world desperately needed powerful people who would not waste common lives.
What could I gain if I went down there?
Keorn answered, wealth, fame, power, friendship, family, or simply a life larger than the hill. Then he examined Turan's unusual senses, his effortless tracking, and his talent for projectile attacks. The more they compared those traits, the darker Keorn's expression became. The answer connected Turan to the house that had destroyed Keorn's family.
The characteristics of the Zahar bloodline stand out the most. They are called pursuers or hunters.
Turan had never met House Zahar. He had never joined their war. Yet the power inside his body carried the name of Keorn's enemy. For a long moment, neither of them knew what to say. Keorn was the first to break the silence. Turan had not fought in the old war, and inherited blood did not make him guilty. Keorn trusted the character of the young man, who had welcomed a stranger and risked exposure to save him.
If you try to wash blood with blood, the fighting will never end.
During the 3 days Keorn needed to recover, Turan became his student. Keorn explained that the difficulty of magic rested on 3 things:
bloodline mastery and causality.
Bloodline made certain miracles natural. Mastery made familiar actions cheaper and stronger. Causality demanded a believable path between desire and result. Turan could not simply wish a magical beast dead, but he could create a flame, shape it through a motion he knew, and strike the target with it. Then Turan tested the Zahar bloodline's greatest gift. He wished not to be seen, heard, or smelled, and vanished from Keorn's entire perception. Even after surviving a war against Zahar, the old knight admitted that perfect concealment was still terrifying. When Keorn's wounds healed, Turan packed his mother's keepsakes, sold the sheep, and left the only home he had ever known. At the road below the village, the 2 men finally had to separate.
If you do not like the world out there, you can always come back.
Only after Keorn disappeared down the northern path did Turan understand why the old man's formal words had always bothered him. Beneath his mother's love, Turan had carried a quiet wish for a father, someone gentle enough to guide him and strong enough to become an example. Turan turned south. An unknown world waited beyond the hill. The land south of Hisaril was a red-brown wasteland with almost no people, water, or shade. Turan survived by commanding birds to approach, extracting clean water from their blood, and walking at a pace that would have been a run for an ordinary man. Near midday, he met 6 armed men pulling a covered cart. They claimed to be merchants, gave him directions to Murray City, and then surrounded him when he turned away. Leave the bag and get lost. We will let you keep your clothes." Turan smelled the lie in their predatory excitement. He multiplied a breeze into a violent gust that hurled all 6 men away, then tested heated ice spikes and blades of earth against those who rose again. Only one bandit remained alive. Before killing him, Turan asked why they had attacked a lone traveler who might easily have been a wizard. "You bowed your head when our leader spoke rudely, so we assumed you were ordinary."
Thank you. You have taught me something valuable.
In this wilderness, courtesy without visible strength invited predators. Turan granted the man a painless death, took the bandits' money, and followed their wheel tracks until the barren earth began to grow green. By sunset, he stood above Murray City and saw more people in one place than he had encountered in his entire life. Murray astonished Turan. Hundreds of people crossed dark brick streets without greeting one another. Shops demanded payment before answering questions, and even a room at an inn required learning a new currency. A barmaid named Lena explained that City Hall handled magical beast bounties, but only after Turan bought a mug of beer. The city taught him another rule. Information was never free. A rough-looking man named Maiden overheard them. He and 3 sworn brothers had abandoned life as city thugs to become beast hunters, ordinary men who gambled their lives on a chance to awaken magic.
The claim that ordinary people can become wizards by hunting magical beasts is true. I have seen it myself.
They had already killed 3 weak beasts, though none of them had awakened. Seeing Turan's worn slingshot, Midden invited him to join because the group needed another marksman.
No, I am fine on my own.
Later, Turan heard Maiden's companions mock him through the thin floorboards. Then Midden defended the same stranger they had laughed at, saying a young traveler with only a sling reminded him of his own reckless past. The world, Turan decided, contained both false smiles and real kindness. The next morning, City Hall gave him a bounty list and a warning. Any slain magical beast had to be brought back or stripped of its magic, because an abandoned corpse could rise as an undead spirit. The most urgent target was a blade crow that preyed on dogs and children. Beyond the city walls, Turan closed his eyes and cast crow detection. Crow detection failed at first because hundreds of ordinary birds surrounded Murray. Turan narrowed the condition again and again until he searched for one crow larger than a young child. Only a single target answered. He followed the trace to a massive tree, hid himself with simple invisibility, and floated up beside the nest. The blade crow stood more than a meter tall. Its folded feathers were sharp as steel, and bones from animals and humans lay beneath its feet. Turan could have ended it with his slingshot, but Keorn had warned him not to depend on a single weapon. The sky was thick with clouds, providing the natural cause for a spell he had only studied.
Come.
Thunder rolled. A bolt struck the nest before the crow could escape. Its blade feathers burned to metal like ash. Its wings failed, and the creature crashed to the ground. Turan waited until it stopped moving, then descended and absorbed its power. By the end of the day, he had found 7 magical beasts. 5 became strength inside his body. 2 weaker ones were captured alive and carried to City Hall. The official reluctantly paid 25 silver rum. For dinner, Turan ordered the most expensive meal in the inn. Soft bread, fruit jam, glazed chicken, and ribs under melted cheese showed him that wealth could buy pleasures he had never known on the hill. Within 3 days, Turan had hunted more than 30 beasts, and the region around Murray was already beginning to run out of worthwhile prey. Turan's success made Maiden's group increasingly desperate. 2 of the men followed him upstairs and demanded a share of his earnings. Less than a minute later, both rolled back down the steps, beaten senseless. Maidan apologized and admitted the truth. For 2 years, 4 ordinary men had wandered from city to city, hunting beasts between temporary jobs, yet they had killed only 3. In another few days, they would not even be able to pay for their rooms.
Here,
Turan handed him 10 silver coins. Maiden had shown him kindness before knowing whether it would be repaid. The attack by his companions had already been answered with fists that did not erase Maiden's earlier goodwill.
Consider it repayment for inviting me because you thought traveling alone was dangerous.
In exchange, Midden shared everything he knew: nearby cities, dangerous territories, old ruins, and beasts worth hunting. Then he mentioned Orem, a major city to the northeast with a library said to contain thousands of books.
A wizard can enter the library?
Turan knew how to read because his mother had taught him by drawing letters in sand, but he had never held a book. The thought of thousands of them awakened a desire stronger than money or food. He wanted to understand the world. He planned one final hunt before leaving Murray. That decision brought him to the bodies of Maiden and his brothers. Turan found one of Maiden's companions clutching a torn abdomen. Nearby lay Maiden's severed head and 2 bodies ripped apart. A rabbit no larger than a cat turned blood-red eyes toward him while chewing beside the dead. The beast launched itself like an arrow and sliced through a tree with front teeth that nearly touched the ground. It even deflected Turan's supersonic stones. The opponent, Keorn, had warned him about one that could defeat his favorite weapon, had appeared. Turan activated perfect concealment. The rabbit froze when its target vanished from sight, hearing, and smell. Turan moved behind it, drove a dagger into its throat, twisted the blade, and flew beyond the reach of its frantic counterattack. For a full minute, the wounded beast destroyed the surrounding trees while searching for an enemy that no longer existed to its senses. Only after it collapsed did Turan reveal himself and absorb magic greater than the leopard's. "You are a wizard."
Yes. Do any of you have families who would want keepsakes?
The answer was no. Turan buried all 4 men in a sunny place at the forest's edge. Their graves became the end of a dream pursued with courage, greed, kindness, and far too little power. At dawn, Turan left Murray and headed northeast toward Orem. The road to Orem crossed richer land, old stone highways, wheat fields, and forests dense with life. On the 4th day, Turan reached a metropolis of tens of thousands, protected by walls and order unlike anything he had seen. The Sky Library was easy to find. It rose more than 30 stories above the city, an impossible tower left from the old empire. Turan approached its entrance and asked whether a wizard could enter. The guard tested him with a controlled release of magic. Turan answered in kind and nearly crushed the man's presence without meaning to. The difference was so great that the guard immediately lowered his head.
I am Keisha, a knight of House Baltos. Your Grace, may I ask which noble house you hail from? Do I need to say that to enter?
Kesha misunderstood the question as a warning and apologized. The library required permission from the head of House Baltes, so a steward named Raiden arrived in a 4-horse carriage to invite Turan to the family's castle. The first stage of noble hospitality was a bath. Turan tried to dismiss the maids, but they fell to their knees in terror, because failure to serve him would be punished. He had known that wizards stood above commoners. He had never understood how completely fear enforced that distance. Exhausted by their fear, Turan allowed them to wash him. Warm water, soap, combs, and clean clothing stripped away 18 years of dust and made visible the noble appearance his life as a shepherd had hidden. When the maids finished, a gray-haired young noble looked back at Turan from the mirror. Clean skin revealed sharp features, gray eyes, and steel-colored hair that the maids had polished until it gleamed. In white clothes embroidered with gold, Turan no longer looked like a handsome beggar. He looked like a young prince. A young woman in a blue-gray gown appeared in the hallway, openly called him the guest who had arrived looking like a beggar, and laughed at Raiden's attempt to correct her.
I am Izela Beltaz. And you are?
Turan gave only his first name and used the story Keorn had prepared. A conflict with another house made his lineage dangerous to reveal. Isela answered by releasing her magic to test whether he was a fraud. Turan released his own power. Sparks cracked through the hallway. For the first time, he met someone close to his level, and Isela looked just as startled to discover an unknown young man who could match her.
So, dear guest, shall we get married?
Turan stared at her in complete silence. Isela laughed, claimed it was a muy joke, and vanished down the corridor while Redan apologized as though he had aged 10 years. A few moments later, Turan entered the office of Lug Baltas, Lord of Aram. Lug Baltas received Turan in an office filled with antique furniture and stuffed magical beasts. He tested the young man's hidden lineage, then accepted the etiquette of mutual hospitality. Turan would respect Baltas' territory, and Baltas would treat him as a noble guest.
So, you want to use the library. For what purpose? I lack much general knowledge. I want to learn about the world through books.
Lug granted permission and told him to begin the next day. The faint smile on the Lord's face suggested that the favor would not remain free forever, but Turan accepted the bargain. Inside the Sky Library, a spiral staircase circled ancient shelves under a white magical light. War had emptied the upper floors, yet thousands of surviving books remained. A librarian explained the rules and stayed close enough to watch every page Turan touched. The first book was bound in cowhide and written by hand on fine parchment. Turan had learned letters from his mother by scratching them into sand. Holding an object she had wanted but could never afford filled him with pride, grief, and gratitude at once. Journey around the world carried him across impossible mountain passes, burning deserts, frozen nights, hidden dwarves, jungle fairies, and mermaids on distant reefs. Half a book taught him more than years of staring from the hill. For 6 days, Turan read from morning until evening. He learned about noble houses, cities, materials, magical beasts, ancient relics, and the old empire. The world stopped being a shapeless unknown and became something he could study, compare, and eventually explore. On the 6th morning, Lug Baltas summoned him before he could reach the library. Lug admitted that allowing Turan into the library had been a separate favor from ordinary hospitality. Now he wanted repayment. A magical beast had blocked Orum's northern trade road for 10 days.
4 knights who went to subdue it were eaten. If you join my daughter and nephew, the hunt will be much safer.
Turan saw the design clearly. Lug had welcomed an unknown noble, given him 6 days of knowledge, and waited until refusing would violate the balance of favors. The method was calculated, but the request itself was fair and protecting the road also protected the commoners whose labor fed the city.
I understand.
Turan joined Isela, Marvin, and 12 knights. As they marched through Aurum, commoners knelt while the nobles passed. The knights looked far less confident. They knew the unknown beast had already killed 4 of their kind. On the empty North Road, Turan found a broken cart, blood-soaked clothing, and a giant 5-fingered handprint. A guide he had read in the library supplied the answer: a monkey magical beast. He followed the victim's blood into the forest until the trail ended at a stream. When Turan canceled the tracking spell, a strong animal odor struck him from behind. Golden eyes opened in the bushes.
Behind us!
The 2-meter monkey hurled fistfuls of gravel, each stone accelerated by magic. Turan leapt aside. Isela and Marvin each grabbed a knight and pulled the armored man into the attack. Bone broke, blood sprayed, and the nobles remained standing behind bodies weaker than their own. Turan heard his mother's voice again. Shepherds could call their dogs family and still sacrifice them when wolves came. The monkey fled through the trees faster than the knights could follow. Turan loaded his slingshot and combined strengthening, acceleration, and pursuit. The stone curved around trunks, struck the beast's waist, and dropped it with a shattered spine. Isela formed a fire serpent thick as a tree trunk and burned the fallen beast. Marvin followed with a rain of flaming spears. Their bloodline magic was broader and faster than anything Turan could produce, but neither attack would have landed without his shot. While the cousins argued over who had fought more heroically, Turan checked the injured knights. The men used as shields had suffered the worst wounds. He applied ointment, set what bones he could, and hid his contempt behind a neutral face.
Come here, guest. It is time to absorb the magic power.
The three nobles absorbed together. Isella and Marvin soon reached their limits and leaked pale green power back into the air. Turan continued drawing everything into himself while the two watched with open envy. On the road back, Turan explained how the beast's giant hands suggested throwing power and its enlarged eyes suggested tracking. The entire party treated the observation as genius, though Turan had only applied what he had read.
Library. No one goes to that stuffy place.
Isella admitted that she had entered once and left before finishing half a book. Turan suggested asking the librarian for something easier to read.
Was there such a person in the library?
Turan stopped walking. For 6 days, a man had followed him through the Sky Library, chosen his books, and watched every page. House Baltas did not even know he existed. Turan had left Hisaril Hill believing the world was divided between predators and prey. Instead, he found something more complicated. A knight who became the father he needed, bandits who mistook kindness for weakness, hunters who carried both greed and goodwill, and nobles who could offer knowledge while sacrificing their own servants. He had gained power, money, and a place among nobles. But the most dangerous thing waiting in Orem might be the person who had stood silently behind him in the library. Who was the librarian no one else could see? And why had he chosen Turan?